intervention by the British government and the post-97 Hong Kong SAR government has created Hong Kong's image as a cultural destination. After China closed its doors in the 1950s, if we browse simply the Hong Kong government's annual reports over the years, you will see that the colonial government then and now both consider culture to be simply an issue of recreation and entertainment, and that cultural policy is understood narrowly as an issue of venue and program administration. They don't care about the content. So before the 1950s, they don't even support it. But after the 1950s, after China closed its door, the Cold War mentality begins. The British government do not want Hong Kong people to identify too much with the Chinese nation. Right? They do not want to promote our nationalism and sense of connectedness with China. And also, they wanted to promote to Hong Kong people that communist China is horrible, scary, everything you don't want. So they need to do something culturally to define Hong Kong's difference vis-a-vis China. And also to quiet down our very vibrant political, cultural commentary scene. If a lot of people write a lot of critical things in the newspaper, very thoughtful about all these important public issues, right? It would cause Hong Kong people to continue to think about a lot of things and be critical to both situations in China and situations in Hong Kong, and they don't want that. So they want to discourage people from more sophisticated, radical, critical kind of art and work. And they want to promote or turn the Hong Kong population towards a more passive, or turn the Hong Kong population towards a more passive consumption of recreation and entertainment. So you can see the arts and culture, how is it understood, right, through what chapters of the annual report they are put in. In 1954, chapter 17 was religion, research, the arts, and sports. Sports, research, religion, together with arts as the cultural things. So you can see there's sports and culture, the arts, are on the same category of recreation and entertainment. 57, the chapter is renamed Sport and Recreation. And everything said in that chapter is about the management of the venues, the hardware. Nothing about the content. Now, in the year when there is a big riot throughout the whole year for almost 2 years, from 1966 to 60, almost 68, right? There's anti-British colonial riots in Hong Kong. And during that time, you see that they start to more and more reinforce the idea of culture as recreation. And you have a whole separate chapter away from the religion and the sports. And you have chapter 21 called Recreation. And under it, you see entertainment and the arts. So entertainment is actually, or the arts is part of entertainment, or vice versa. Now, this is also the year the Cultural Revolution happens in China, started in China. And if you look at what is promoted as cultural activities by the government, you would see it really targets your understanding of Hong Kong and the world vis-a-vis China. Very interesting. And the other year, which is interesting to look at if you go to the annual reports, is the year when the Cultural Revolution in China ends, when the Cultural Revolution ends in 1976. And the Hong Kong government at that year, for the first time, want to claim Hong Kong as a major cultural center of Asia. And to separate Hong Kong into the urban Hong Kong and the rural Hong Kong. And to disidentify the good side of Hong Kong from the rural. It's also a way of disidentifying Hong Kong from China, who is mainly peasantry and the rural and the proletariat of the peasants and the workers. So it's a way of disidentifying with China as well, right? By defining Hong Kong as urban and Asian, looking towards the whole of Asia and not really connected to national China. So if you look at how they define what culture and recreation, entertainment, and arts are, you will actually see a deliberate cultural policy there, although they do not claim to have one. Now, and later on in the 1980s, you start to have, until now, you start to have a chapter called Recreation in the Arts, which is more stabilized. And it's an understanding, again, the arts as part of recreation. This is a very, very clear, systematic, and consistent. And after the 1967 anti-government, anti-colonial, and even anti-capitalist social movement, it's a movement against all sorts of exploitation. And recently, in the Queen's Pier movement, you see people digging out the history of these events. And a lot of these anti-government protests happened also at Queen's Pier and Star Ferry at that time. And we'll talk more about that later on. So the colonial government at that time turned towards a cultural policy that aimed at using cultural activities as a way to entertain and calm down and pacify the population. Everybody is so angry against the government. The government doesn't like that. Since government officials at that time were rich patrons of the arts, and also at the same time, most of them were foreigners. Most of them, you could say, were British officials sent from Britain. So the kind of calming recreational arts that they were introduced to Hong Kong, that were mainly based on the ruling elite's taste, and so most of them were Western fine arts. What you see in City Hall and so forth. The performing arts also became the privileged tool of cultural sentiment control and a facelift for colonial high-handedness. And you will read here that this idea of privileging the performing arts is sustained until today. We have a lot of policy papers, 1990 and so forth. We have a lot of policies that promote performing arts that can be put on stage, that can sell tickets, but not literature, not visual arts, not philosophy, not publishing, but those things that can be put on stage and will look more like entertainment. And also because you can sell tickets, you can earn from these things. Now in the 1960s to the 1980s, the government's support and promotion of culture was highly tilted in favor not only of Western performing arts, which is both music and theater, but also, in principle, understood narrowly as an issue of physical and psychological health. If you need to calm down a politically outspoken population. You need to calm down a politically critical population. You need to calm down a Chinese population that writes a lot of critical articles in the newspapers, and there are over 100 newspapers talking about all sorts of things every day. And you don't want that. You want to narrow culture to an issue of that's not healthy for the government, for people to think too much about social political issues. That's not healthy. So how do we make Hong Kong people culturally healthy? So they took over this idea of psychological health from the World Health Organization definition of health. And they created the Urban Council and the Regional Council, urban and rural, to take care of the provision of cultural policy and cultural activities understood as a part of recreation. And the aim was to maintain a tame and more or less happy popular